All right, folks, you guys are back for part 2 of the contract, and I'm going to share that with you today. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So you had last time checked out all of these initial documents. We went through agency disclosure, talked about fair housing. We jumped into possible representation of more than one buyer seller. We talked about wire fraud. Then we got into California purchase agreement. We went through page 1 with all the main information I talked about. It's the specifics, what dates and times and dollar figures are involved here. And we got through all the way through page 4. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. We are talking about page 5. So the last thing we were kind of talking about was the financing and loans. First loan, what types of loans, limits on credits to buyers, and then any kind of other financing. So sometimes a buyer has stated financing. So if you're a contractor and you bring money in and it goes back out, so we have something called stated financing. Have to have amazingly good credit to utilize something like that. We talked about closing and possession. And like I said, we talked about all the main numbers on the first real 3 or 4 pages. This is going to get into the specifics and draw out more information about those, but it will not have the dates specific in here, right? So closing and possession, we talked about you guys are going to have 5 days before it closes to do a final walk through the property. Talked about if you're going to take occupancy, condition of the property at closing. When you made your first offer or your offer initially, you specifically said, hey, the house looks like this. We want to make sure the house looks like that when you get it back or when you're getting ready to move into it. So as is, it's as if you saw it when its present condition was when you made your offer. You want to make sure that some kids haven't broken in, vandalized it, broken windows, painted the walls purple, started a flood in the house and damaged wood. Those are what we mean. You're buying the property as it was. Now, we're also going to have repairs possibly done, and that's part of your negotiation. We'll talk about that a little bit further when we get to inspections. But we may have said, hey, we want a $5,000 credit. You're going to do the repairs yourself at a later time. No big deal. But sometimes we'll say to the seller, hey, these are some major items. We would prefer those be done when we do our walkthrough. Before we close, we want to verify, hey, was the water leak fixed? Did they, paint the room? Did they put the new roof on? Whatever it is that we negotiated. So that's that part. Seller to remain in possession after closing. Like I said, this has really been common over the last couple of years because someone is selling this house and they got to buy the next one. And so sometimes there's a little bit of transition between those two pieces. And we may have allowed the seller to stay in that property for a week, a month. I don't know. Something we'll negotiate. Something we'll also talk about. Contingencies and removal contingencies. You're going to hear me talk about this when we're talking about earnest money deposit. I'm going to talk to you guys about my fist. This is the earnest money deposit. I'm going to make sure we do everything we can to hold on to that money. When we go through the process of our appraisals done and the value's good, inspections are done and we've negotiated what we feel to be fair, when the loan is approved, every time we do one of those contingencies, and I say we're going to sign this page, removing this contingency, that is taking one little finger off of that deposit, which ultimately is going to make that deposit opened up, and it's going to be right here, and it's going to be closer and closer to the seller. So I do everything I can to make sure that fist is held tight through the process until you guys are 100% ready to say, yes, we're moving forward. We're not stopping for anything. There's no, nothing wrong with the house. Loan is in good shape and we are ready to rock. So what are the contingencies? Some of the contingencies will include your appraisal. We're going to talk about investigation of the property and review the seller documents. The seller might tell you, hey, there was a death on the property. My mom died in the house. And she had cancer. It was natural causes. And for most people, hey, it's probably not a big deal, but there are some people that just are like, nope, I can't have a death on the property. It's just an issue for me. Someone might say, hey, we did a bunch of work and it was all done unpermitted. So when the seller gives you these documents and said, yeah, I added on that second story and has no permits, that might be something that causes you as the buyer to back away. And I would probably recommend that, to be honest. Title. Title is what is going to give you guys the insurance for your property. We're saying the seller, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, have the ability to sell their property to you, the buyer, right? If you're in a condominium planning and development, there are certain disclosures that have to be told about, hey, where can you park? Can you paint your property? Things like that. There are pieces that additional disclosures, additional documents that have to be reviewed by you as the owner, the buyer, that have to make sure you're going to be okay to live in that condominium. If you can't have your kids out playing basketball, you might not want to live in that development. Buyer review of leased or lien items. Main thing for this is usually solar. We want to make sure that there's 16 panels. The cost is $150 a month. It's a lease. It's up for 20 years. They're 5 years in. Is that something you're willing to do? For leases and for solar, pretty common. There's usually a decent enough savings with the cost of the solar versus what the actual utility bill would be. So most people do move forward with that. Now, we just talked about this removal or waiver contingencies. As you start to go through the process, we're going to release those contingencies and move that deposit a little closer to the seller. Now, if you're buying a house cash and we know it's a fixer and you want to remove your contingencies, you have the ability to do that. It's not something I recommend, especially not for my brand new first-time buyers. Removal of contingencies and cancellation. So if we remove contingencies and we've ultimately said that deposit is up towards that seller, and then something crazy happens, you get transferred and you got to move to Texas, whatever, there is a very good chance that we've released the contingencies and that deposit is going to go towards that seller. Now, things weird happen, and I mean, obviously we're going to go back to the seller and say, listen, this was something way beyond our control, a loss of job, someone gets sick, whatever. And it's possible they may say, yes, it's beyond your control, we'll give you guys the deposit back. Or they might say, hey, we're out over here on this side as well, so we've got to negotiate, give me half, or nope, I want it all. You have the ability then to go to small claims court over it if it's less than $10,000. And it's something that does not happen very often. I think once or twice in my entire career have I really had an issue with the deposit. Sometimes, people are stout or kind of standoffish for a day or two, and then they realize, hey, I need to let go of this so I can sell my property to the next buyer anyways. And, usually it becomes like a no big deal. So if you have a property you're trying to sell, you got to sell this property in order to buy this one. That's another contingency that might be in place. Items included, excluded from the sale. Oftentimes anything that's affixed to the property, the mirrors, the light fixtures, the stove, the microwave, they're attached to the property. They are going with the property. But every once in a while, a seller says, hey, this is a family heirloom chandelier and I have got to take it with me. Or someone will say, hey, that's a Wolf stove and I paid 10 grand for it. I'm taking it with me. That's fine. That's all part of our negotiation. That's something that we'll work through. Okay. Items included in the sale. We're going to talk also Ring doorbells. Those are attached. Camera systems. A lot of times those are attached to the property, and that'll be something we negotiate. Liened items. Those are attached to the property, so they have to transfer with the property. Very rarely would I see anybody say, hey, I'm going to sell you my property, but I'm taking my solar with me. So like I said, those will be things that we talk about specifically as we're talking about your property as we move forward. But for right now, I'm kind of giving you guys the gist of the overall, okay? Leased or lien item systems we talked about. Items excluded from the sale. We just talked about that as well. Allocated costs. So buyers, you are normally going to pay for home inspection, pest inspection, roof inspection, sewer inspection. Sellers would pay for the NHD report. If we're buying country property, sellers usually pay for the well and the septic system as well. But I, as a listing agent, like to tell my sellers, hey, let's do the inspections up front. I like to do a home inspection, pest inspection. Depending on the age of the property, I'll do additional inspections up front. The reason is if those inspections are all provided to the buyer, saves you about $1,000 as a buyer, but then you're making your offer based on what you already see. So if you know there's a foundation issue, you might not make the offer, or you might make a very low offer. If you know it's a couple little minor things, nothing of health and safety issues, you say, cool, I'm going to make my offer of $500,000 and I'm willing to take the property as it is. We'll do those repairs at a later time. So, but that's how inspections work. Government requirements and corrective or remedial actions. The only thing that's really necessary is if you are doing a VA loan, if you're a veteran, obviously thank you for your service. Love to work with veterans. My daughter is in the Navy. And there is some things that have to be done. So that's a government requirement, and that is a Section 1 and usually Section 2 clearance. And we'll get into that when you get to the loan side if you're doing a VA loan. California doesn't have any really major point of sale requirements. at least now, and obviously laws change and they may adjust. So there's nothing there. Reinspection fees. If we are getting reports done, inspections done, and then repairs have been done, but they're underground, we can't see it, we may ask for a reinspection from the company that did it. We can ask for copies of receipts. If the homeowner says, hey, I'm going to do those repairs, I'm a contractor, I'm going to ask to see receipts. I'm going to ask to see a copy of their license, most likely. I don't like when a homeowner says, I will do those repairs. I usually ask from, and obviously working with you guys, the buyers, you make the decision. We want a licensed, bonded, insured contractor to do the work. So we like to do that. Home warranty, we talked about this. I like to put this off on the seller. It actually protects the seller as well. So it protects buyer and seller, because if there's anything that happens in the next 12 months and you got to go in and say, hey, home inspection said it was fine, we're 6 months in and our water heater went out, or heater went out, the dishwasher went out, whatever it is, home warranty is going to cover a portion of that. And it's usually like for like. So if they can fix it and just get you that same part, cool, no big deal. But if the dishwasher is 15 years old and they tell you, hey, the motor's out, we can't get that motor, we have to get a new dishwasher, they're usually going to give you a credit for a portion of that, because you're ultimately getting a pretty massive upgrade. So that's kind of how home warranties work. We're going to specifically dive into another video that's going to talk about home warranties. Statutory and other disclosures, including lead-based paint, hazards. The seller is responsible to do these documents right here. TDS and supplemental disclosure, TDS, SPQ. You're going to hear us in another video talk about disclosures. We're going to go through what they are. And this is the seller filling out information to tell you about this house. We just painted the house 12 months ago. We did a room addition, but it was fully permitted. We've redone the flooring in the last 6 months. Hey, my mom passed away on the property. These are all the things in disclosure that are going to be specific. And like I said, we're going to talk about disclosures in a full another video as well. So lead disclosures, house was built before 1978. It might have lead paint. You know what they tell you to do? They tell you to repaint the house, just paint over it. The only way to really move lead paint would be to remove all of the sheetrock. That is a massive cost. I rehabbed a house, 1,200 square foot, and we literally ripped it down to the studs, and it was $10,000 to redo the sheetrock and tape and texture it. So we are buying up in the mountains, up in the hills. We're going to deal with fire and home hardening. That is defensible space. If we're buying in a standard community, not going to be anything that matters to you guys, really. Return of signed copies, we got all that. Termination of rights, withholding of taxes. Withholding of taxes is specific to the seller, okay? Megan's Law database, and actually I want to go back to that. Withholding of taxes, escrow is responsible for withholding those taxes on behalf of the seller, right? If it's their primary residence, there's usually not taxes, but escrow does help us and protect us by withholding those taxes. Megan's Law database, there is the website right there. I don't tell anybody that you should, gauge where a creeper is. I tell everybody you should look at it and say, hey, if your wife is home alone, if your kids are going to be walking the neighborhood, how far is that? Some people, anybody within a mile might be too much. But sometimes I've seen people buy a house and, it's down the street. So it's up to you to look at that database and decide if that is someone that's just too close to you. Notice regarding gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines in a lot of homes in Sacramento and surrounding areas. We have PG&E, so there is gas lines underneath the ground. This is a website where you can go to and ask them, hey, I'm going to dig up, I'm going to build a pool, I'm going to do whatever. Can you please come out and mark my property? This is the website you'll go to get that dialed in. All right. Natural and environmental hazards. We're going to get an NHD report. You guys are going to see a video on that as well. Condominium plan unit development disclosures. If the property is a condo, a townhouse, or if it's in a gated community, an HOA, there are going to be additional documents that are specific to that property, and you will have to look at those and make sure that you can live within those rules and guidelines. Solar systems, we've talked about. This is solar, like I said, it could be a lease. Someone could have purchased it and they own it and they're just going to transfer it to you, no big deal. But leases, buyer has to qualify. There's some other pieces that happen within there. And like I said, we're going to dive into that, but today is just a general overview of the offer process. Buyer's investigation of properties and matters affecting the property. This is our home inspection. These are our disclosures. This is you driving through the neighborhood on Thursday at 3 p.m. to see how many kids are walking through the neighborhood. If the school's right across the street, the chances are there's going to be traffic. I want you to see and check that out. Also going to tell you do things like drive through on a Friday night. See if there's a bunch of kids playing basketball. Find out if there's guys on their porch drinking beer, or hey, it's super quiet. There's no cars on the street. Is it the neighborhood you want to be in, right? Title and vesting. This is an escrow piece more than anything else. I own my home with my wife as husband and wife as joint tenants. That's our decision. It could be in a trust. You could be tenants in common. Escrow and title. There's a video on that as well. You're going to see and you're going to understand. They're going to give you a sheet of paper with some options on what you can choose. And they'll give you a little bit of direction to understand, you know, what's majority used, what's very common. And here are some of the options in title investing, right? Time periods, removal contingencies. Notice that we've talked contingencies several times throughout this process. There are different contingency periods. And like I said, it's that money sitting in there, earnest money, and we're releasing a little bit of our hold on that as we go through contingencies. We go over this several times so that you can understand this is a big deal. We talk about, hey, we've had our inspections, everything looks good, we negotiated those couple offers, we're releasing that contingency. You know you're moving down the process. At any time at all, if you have questions, I want you to highlight this contract. I want you to call me, text me, email me, and say, I've got a question about this. That's the process. As we go through this is me getting you guys ready for the buying process before you even get into contract, so that you're ready to go when we do actually find the right house for you and your family moving forward. Buyer has a right to review documents. Seller's right to cancel. This is an important one, and it's kind of interesting because most people don't realize this is once the buyer and seller go into contract, you, the buyer, have really a lot of the power, and I don't mean like a power trip, but you have the ability to cancel the contract at any time through the process and say, hey, we found out something in home inspection, we found out we're getting job transfer, loan rates went up 1%, whatever, that might adjust or make it not worth for you to buy this property, so you can back out. But the seller really doesn't have the right to back out. Now, maybe the seller is selling because I'm moving to Texas and they got a job transfer and we're 15 days in and they come in and say, hey, listen, our job transfer got canceled. Would you, the buyer, be willing to allow us out of our contract? And you, the buyer, have the ability to say, you know what? Yeah, I mean, it's totally cool. It's beyond, you know, anything we could have known. And so we'll do that, but we're going to ask you to at least reimburse us for our inspections. And you could also at the same time say, you know what? No, I'm sorry. We've already given our notice. We love this house. This is the only house like this one. We have to have this house. They're bound by contract. Seller doesn't just be able to, sorry, I'm going to cancel on you guys. So that's the scoop. Buyer right to cancel. We talked about this. This is during the contingency period. As you've made your offer, as we're going through all the steps in the 30-day process, you have the right to cancel. Now, keep in mind, once again, contingencies, if you have released all your contingencies and you say, you know what, we would hit the lottery, we're going to back out, the chances are your deposit is going to be at risk. So just wanted to touch base on that. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stop right here. We've gotten through about 6 pages, and I'm going to break this down into another document. I don't want to give anybody too much information where your head's swimming, you're all starry-eyed. But hey, if you get through this one and you're like, hey, I'm ready to go, you can just grab the next video, part 3, and move through the rest of the buying process. All right, thanks so much. Talk to you guys soon. Take care.